Welcome everyone to the UFC 205 Vivisection non-wavy arm intro from me, Zane Simon, joined by Conor of Bloody Elbow. We are here to talk about what could be one of the biggest UFC pay-per-view cards of all time. Quite frankly, I would not at all be surprised if this beats UFC 202 to set a new high bar for the UFC's pay-per-view revenue and probably pushes them over the edge this year for being their highest selling pay-per-view year if it's not already there.
I'm not confident that it will surpass 202 in terms of sales just because of the Silva-Weidman rematch did much bigger numbers than the first, and 202 did bigger numbers than 196. I think that Diaz heat, with it being McGregor's first effort at getting revenge in the UFC, was a big deal. But it's pretty clear by now that any McGregor fight really sells. And with this undercard to back it up with two other title fights, it's got to be a big moneymaker for the UFC regardless.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think it comes in at least at like 1.4. You know,
it's definitely coming in over $1 million. I mean, I don't know enough about the financial aspects of the fight game to know, but it would be really shocking if this didn't come in considerably over $1 million buys.
Exactly. So it's a big, exciting card. There's a ton to talk about. We are going to have to cut through some very good fights with some very good fighters just to make any kind of headway and any kind of time on this because we've got way too much to talk about. First and foremost, let's just dive right in, not waste a lot of time. We are going to talk about the women's bantamweight bout opening up the prelims between Liz Carmouche and Katlyn Chookagian. Conor, what are your thoughts on this?
Katlyn Chookagian, one of 4 Mark Henry trained fighters on this card. That's an interesting story here. We have a lot of fighters from Mark Henry's Long Island camp, and I think she's a Renzo Gracie jiu-jitsu player as well. That seems to be a constant matchup. It's a tough one to call here because Chookagian had a little trouble with the grappling of Lauren Murphy, and Lauren Murphy is physically strong, but I'm not convinced she's as physically strong as Liz Carmouche. Then again, she may be a better all-around wrestler and grappler than Liz Carmouche. And the weird thing is that Carmouche seems to kind of be preferring the style that Chookagian is best at these days. We see a lot of outfighting from Liz Carmouche. So in my mind, I've got to pick Chookagian because if Carmouche looks for that kind of fight, I think Chookagian's better there. She's got better kicking game, she's got a better jab, and just a more sophisticated array of setups. And her footwork is really solid as well. All the things that Mark Henry really does well, as we've seen with guys like Edgar and Barboza and Marlon Moraes. And then the caveat there is that Chookagian is small for this division. She was normally a flyweight before coming to the UFC, and I don't think she's particularly strong. So if Carmouche does decide to just get after her and drag her down, we could see Carmouche win a pretty dull fight, but she's not that damaging typically when she does get someone down. She's a control fighter on the ground, so I'm going to say Chookagian. Not 100% certain about it, of course, but Chookagian is my pick by decision.
At the very least, Chookagian's not actually short for the division. She's actually pretty tall. She's 5'9". But yeah, she's like not
like a big. She's like McGregor at welterweight. Like, doesn't look undersized, but she's not. Yeah, she's not packing on the muscle. You know,
and at the same point, Carmouche is actually a bit small for the division as well, except that she packs on a lot of muscle.
She's like a Chad Mendez or like a Michael Chandler. She's built. I mean, Gorilla is a pretty appropriate nickname for her build.
Yeah, it is tough because Carmouche, other than losing to Ronda Rousey, has never impressed me, win or lose.
Yep.
She rarely fights to her strengths. Even I was watching, her fight against Meisha Tate, I believe it was, against Lauren Murphy. And like at one point she hit this like great power takedown in that fight. And it's just like, oh man, if she can do that to Chookagian once a round, she can absolutely win this fight. But the rest of the fight, watching that, I was like, how did she win this? Yeah. She just spent the whole time on her heels, barely throwing anything. Mm-hmm. If she does that against Chookagian, she's really setting herself up for a loss. I don't know. Yeah, I would like to see Chukagian win because, like I say, I'm just always constantly frustrated by Liz Carmouche. I feel like it's always this struggle of like, what are you doing in there? Why are you fighting this way? Why are you ranked 5th in your division? It's like 9th now, but
And I'm not going to complain if Chukagian continues to impress because I would like to see more like skilled striking specialists in the bantamweight division.
At least people who have a really good idea of how to win a fight. That's the thing to me. Like, Chukagian is a points-creating, round-winning style of fighter that, God, I just want to see that. I want to see more people who are in there with like, oh yeah, no, I know how to win this round.
Yeah. Which she did against Murphy. Like I think she had a tough second round, if I recall correctly, and she knew how to adapt, and she adjusted really smartly in the third round and very clearly won the fight.
Yeah, so I'm going to pick Chukagian as well, but I fully can see Liz Carmouche going out there and just being like, I can just pick you up and dump you and then work you over on the ground for 2 or 3 minutes of each round, and that'll get me the win.
And if Chukagian does win, I know this isn't the thing we talk about on this show, I'd really like to see Chukagian versus Boetsch Correia. I think that has a tendency to be a really fun fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Odds on this, Chukagian is actually favored, which surprises the hell out of me, honestly. She is at 167 up to 180 or 190. Liz Carmouche, the underdog, plus 153 to plus 145.
If you can get Carmouche north of plus 150, I think there might be some value there because this is the size and strength advantage it's a big factor.
And Katlyn Chukagian, like, she very much is. She's not a powerful fighter.
No,
she's not going to stop Liz Carmouche, and she's coming up. She's had 2 years of pro experience, coming over from kickboxing and from amateur MMA. And it's just, that is absolutely the prototype of a fighter that doesn't do that well in a lot of bouts at the UFC level. Like, that just gets out wrestled and ground down. So Carmouche as an underdog is not the worst pick there. It's just that she may fight like she's going to kickbox Chukagian, and then
we are seeing a shift in that pattern, though. This will be the last thing I say about this fight, but we are seeing a shift towards more people coming from striking backgrounds and doing well. You know,
we are.
Like it's Rashid Magomedov, like Joanna Jedrzejczyk, like Edson Barboza, like Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Like, there are a lot more people coming from Muay Thai and kickboxing backgrounds that are going into good MMA gyms and learning layered takedown defense.
Yeah, and by all means, she's got a good MMA gym behind her. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm a little surprised Chukagian's the favorite, even though we're both picking her. But I wouldn't, neither woman winning would surprise me at all. That brings us to a lightweight bout: Jim Miller, Thiago Alves. Really fun fight. Really hard for me to pick because there is so little constructive tape on Thiago Alves right now. Like, I know who Thiago Alves is, and I know how he fights, but I also know he's had one, he fought twice in 2015. Neither fight was particularly physically impressive, and he's barely fought since 2011. Jim Miller, on the other hand, looked terrible against Diego Sanchez, then had a completely meaningless fight with Takanori Gomi.
He looked good against Joe Lozon, though.
And then he looked good against Joe Lozon. And
so you have two guys where it's tough to know where they're at, because with Jim Miller, you've seen so much with such a wide array of performances. You're like, which Jim Miller is going to show up? With Thiago Alves, it's like, I know how Thiago Alves looks, but where the hell is he at right now?
Yeah, like, I know Thiago Alves has taken power off of his game. Yeah. I know he's gotten craftier, and I also know that he's less durable and less able to take damage than he used to be. And that's why I think I'm picking Jim Miller at the end of the day, because Jim Miller, for even in his terrible performances, Jim Miller is still incredibly durable. And I think that there's a much better chance for Miller to weather scary moments from Thiago Alves and bully through, push through, get takedowns, find submission scrambles, make something work, or hurt Thiago Alves enough to take over the fight. Then I feel like I can be sure that Thiago Alves is going to hold his technical advantage round after round.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me. Jim Miller has never been an incredible wrestler. He's pretty good. He's determined. Yeah. And he's got pretty good timing. He's not a bad striker, and I think that plays to that as well. He's got some good movement and good timing with his counter strikes, and a lot of people who are good counter strikers, when they commit to it, are good wrestlers as well, good reactive takedown artists. But Thiago Alves, I think, is still very difficult to take down. That has always been one of his strongest suits, is that if you go into a fight expecting to out-wrestle Thiago Alves, you are going to have a tough time. I did think he looked pretty good, and I thought he looked pretty good in his last 3 performances. I thought he was really competitive with Carlos Condit before getting caught, and he did a really remarkable job of surviving for so long against one of the best finishers in welterweight history. And then, he's taken power out of his game and maybe lost a little size, but that might come back a bit at lightweight. And I think he's probably still better than Jim Miller in a pure striking battle.
Oh, yeah, he is.
So I think I'm going to go with Alves. It's obviously a chancy pick because I don't know where he is, but Jim Miller has not been that consistent lately either. All the benefit of me having so much footage to watch hasn't made me feel great about what Jim Miller is going to show up, because I did pick him in the Lozon fight expecting a repeat of their first performance, but it was a really close fight. Closer perhaps even than the first one. A lot of people thought Joe Lozon should have won with his wrestling. So I'm going to pick Alves. I think he'll win a decision. Either way, I think this is probably set to be one of the more fun fights on the card, because like Miller's fight with Lozon, these are 2 guys who are action fighters. Miller is very determined and always looking for the finish, whether on the feet or on the ground. Alves, still a very crafty striker, and I'm not confident that Miller can hurt him, so I think we will see a lot of punches and kicks being exchanged. So, yeah. I'm expecting like a Muay Thai battle between these 2.
It's true. And I think a part of the reason I think I'm picking Miller here is that it's not that I think Miller's got, part of it is that he's been, he tends to weather storms well and keep fighting well over rounds. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I don't know that I trust Alves to be able to counter being pushed at a high pace.
Maybe not, yeah.
That's, I think, the thing that I'm really concerned about, is that physically, I don't know that he can handle somebody who's going to really come after him. If he did okay
in the Bashinsky fight, which was a pretty fast-paced fight, but also that was like 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's tough. And this is his first bout at lightweight, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I'm never a fan. I'm a little relieved that the Rashad Evans fight isn't happening, because frankly, I like Rashad and I don't want to see him make this last desperate bid at a lower division. I don't care how amazing and shredded he looked. It pains me a bit to see Rashad lose, because he's, I think, a very likable guy. So, I'm always worried when fighters go at the very end of their career and you know what, maybe I'll just be bigger, and it gets harder and harder to cut weight with time, so it often doesn't work out.
Yeah. So that's why I'm taking my pick, even though I agree if this is just a pure striking battle, Thiago Alves definitely has the technical edge and the power edge. Miller is the underdog here, plus 143 to plus 130. Thiago Alves, the favorite, minus 157 to minus 180.
Is there a prop on Miller by finish of some kind?
Let's see. Miller wins inside the distance is plus 364. So
that might be worth going for.
Yeah.
Cutting weight could affect Alves' chin, which hasn't looked good lately at all. If he feels weaker at lightweight, Miller might be able to get him down, in which case the submission game. And Miller's a very prolific finisher, so that might be worth something.
That might be. If you're gonna take the underdog chance on Miller, then maybe take the chance that he wins by finish.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the Fox Sports 1 prelims. Vicente Luque versus Belal Muhammad.
Another good fight. Another one that won't attract viewers, which is obviously why they put it on the very top of the prelims, but should absolutely be an exciting fight. Belal Muhammad, both you and I were pretty excited to see him coming into the UFC. He looked really rough in that fight with Alan Jouban, but staged a really impressive comeback. He basically proved what he hadn't had a chance to prove before that in his earlier fights, which is that he can win. He can show a winning effort in a fight that is absolutely not going his way. Get hurt many times. It's like Marco Polo Reyes' fight with Dong Hyun Kim. Like, not necessarily great that he got beat up, but it gave us the chance to see that he can really pull through in a fight that is, testing his will. And then I thought he looked solid in his fight with Augusto Montano. He ate a lot of leg kicks, and that could be a problem going forward. But he showed really good timing with both his takedowns and his counter striking. And I think he's showing a little more power with time, too. I think he's putting a little more pop on his shots. And then Luque, on the other hand, is just like the prototypical all-rounder. He's a submission threat. He's a dangerous striker. He throws a lot of volume. He's like a lot of those guys, he's not great defensively. And he's not necessarily great strategically. It's almost like he's kind of confused by his ability to win the fight anywhere sometimes, because then he's not choosing to take the fight anywhere where he has a strong advantage. I'm going with Muhammad. I think second or third round TKO, just through attrition and just being the sharper striker at range and kind of picking Luque off as he sits down on combinations and doesn't protect his chin. But, that well-roundedness could be a problem. And Luque is aggressive. And we have seen Muhammad struggle with that a couple times now in the UFC. So, once again, as will be the tone of this whole card, a well-matched fight.
Yeah, I'm picking Muhammad as well. And the big reason for me is that, unfortunately for Luque, or for Luke, I believe it's Luke, I don't know.
It's something.
Unfortunately for Luke, he's a very good grappler and a very athletic grappler, a very flowy grappler, but all of his wrestling and grappling game flows through his striking success. If he's not winning striking exchanges, he's not going to grapple.
Sure.
Because he tends to have somebody hurt to be able to get them down, or to be able to get them to give up positions he wants to get his grappling game going. And I think that is just going to cost him here, because even if he's doing all right in striking exchanges with Muhammad, I don't think he's ever going to be ahead in them consistently.
That being said, Muhammad, I think, will go for takedowns here. That was a big part of his striking success against Montano. And Luque is a really good – he's not going to make the grappling happen, but if you make it happen, he is a good counter fighter with his submissions. Got great front headlock chokes. So
yes, this is true. That could lead him into a dangerous spot against Luke here. But I think that a lot of it's going to be Luke really being happy to get himself in a kickboxing bout where he's throwing somewhat predictable power shots that Muhammad can counter and pick off. So
I can see it.
Odds on that, Muhammad is the favorite, minus 137 to minus 160. Luke, the underdog, plus 125 down to plus 115. I honestly think those odds could be a little wider, maybe not way wider, but I think it would be like a kind of a Hail Mary win for Luke if he got the win. Like, it would be like, oh, he snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat.
Yeah, I think so. But again, like, it makes me worry because I think Luque is the kind of guy who is well adjusted to taking those kinds of wins. His game works for that kind of opportunistic, out of nowhere submission. So
he is, but he's also well adjusted to taking those kinds of losses. I mean,
sure, yeah.
Carlos Alexandre Pereira Jr. Orgulho, and he's hit a few losses in his early career to guys that nobody's going to be writing about or talking about.
To me, he's kind of the grappling version of like an Alex Nicholson with a few other different problems, but those are the guys, as I've said many times on this show, like it's tough for me to bet against them. And in fact, when they're big underdogs, I often bet on them just because I know how much more keyed in on getting the finish out of any circumstances they are than other fighters.
Very true. All right, that brings us to Rafael Natal versus Tim Boetsch.
Classic middleweight fight.
The most classic middleweight fight, and a super great classic middleweight fight because you have a dude who's been losing a lot and then got a big win against a guy who has been winning a lot and then just got a big loss.
Yeah.
So you really have like these incredibly different momentum strides. It's really kind of hard to measure up exactly how that's going to shake out in this fight. Like, I am kind of feeling like as much success as Natal has had, even beating dudes like Uriah Hall and Tom Watson and Chris Camozzi, who've all, Camozzi and Hall at least have both been very good lately. I'm kind of leaning towards Boetsch. Just because, unlike a lot of those guys, Boetsch is actually best where Natal is going to want to keep this fight. So for Natal, a big thing for him has been that, against guys like Camozzi and Watson and Hall, Camozzi and Watson, who aren't the most athletic dudes in the world, Natal was able to just kind of tie them up inside and drag this fight into a slog, where even though they like to fight in the clinch, he could just make the fight really passive there. Mm-hmm. And against Hall's just passive. So tying him up and turning it into a really passive battle worked exactly in his favor. But Boetsch is like active nowhere else other than the clinch. Or he'll throw out these really random, weird. He has like a distance kicking game that's really weirdly adjusted to his overall style.
All front kicks for some reason.
All front kicks.
Front kicks and left high kicks are like the only kicks he throws.
And then once he's actually in the clinch, that's where he's really dangerous and good and powerful. And he's been generally tough to take down there. And or at least tough to take down by anyone other than really great athletes who have really exciting takedown games. And dudes that have been able to beat him in the clinch, are dudes like Dan Henderson or Ed Herman with that ridiculous knee. And Natal just doesn't have, I don't see anything like that power in Natal's inside game that would slow Boetsch down there or make him think about it. So I'm kind of picking Boetsch to just land all the better shots inside.
I think that's not an illogical pick at all. I think, Tim Boetsch has a real knack for doing to people what Tim Kennedy did to Rafael Natal a few years ago. And that the reason that happened to Natal is because he has this really persistent habit of kind of switching off his defensive responsibility after exchanges. He's actually a pretty good striker. We saw that in the Hall fight. He's a good kicker. He's got good footwork. He moves constantly. Good instinct for like setups and confusing pot shots. He's a good outfighter. But he has a habit that will not go away of letting his hands down, bringing his chin up, and just kind of casually drifting away a lot of times after exchanges. And Boetsch is really good at that, at capitalizing on those openings. He's done that in a lot of his comeback wins that he has now become known for. Did it against Yushin Okami. He did it against, Brad Tavares, catching people on these weird little openings when they don't really think they're vulnerable. And Natal may be more vulnerable than some of those guys are in those openings. But I also think Boetsch is slowing down later in his career. And I think more than any kind of technical skill, Boetsch is a really athletically based fighter. I think throughout his career, he has been really reliant on just being a 300 horsepower physical machine. He's very strong. And you see that a lot of times when people get desperate against him, when they desperately try to make space in the clinch or scramble away or against the fence with him, he can outmuscle them. But when they apply a lot of technique, whether it's in the striking realm or on the ground, he's open to pretty basic technical advantages. We saw that with the Mark Munoz fight. He was badly outgrappled in that fight just because Munoz is a technical wrestler. He was badly outstruck in the Ed Herman fight. And Ed Herman is even slower, but is a pretty good meat and potatoes kickboxer. And so it's tough, man. It's either Natal picks Boetsch apart from range, which I think is the strategy he will take to this fight if he's smart, and not try to tangle with Boetsch too much, or he lets his guard down and does try to grapple with Boetsch and gets out muscled. And I'm going to go with Natal. Just I think he's got more momentum. I thought he had a really good performance in that fight with Robert Whittaker. You know, that's not a fight that somebody with the status of Rafael Natal should really be doing well in. You know, he has not ever had a fight against somebody who's that proven, and it was close. He kicked his legs apart. He looked good, and he didn't get knocked out, which is a good sign because Robert Whittaker is a really dangerous knockout artist, especially at middleweight. So I'm gonna say Natal by decision, but I think there will be at least one scare for him in this fight when Boetsch clips him and he has to scramble for his life.
Yeah, and I think that Natal is the safer pick because we've seen Boetsch lose so much, and Natal, like, even bad god awful fights for Natal, he wins like 80%, 70, 80% of the time.
He will lose a close fight or be winning a fight and and then suddenly lose.
Yeah.
He's like the Ryan Bader of this division. He doesn't exactly impress all the time, but he is a real gamer. It's very difficult to easily beat Rafael Natal.
And Boetsch, on the other hand, is either like he has the perfect matchup for him and he does really well, or, he can come back really well, or he just gets absolutely shit kicked in the wrong matchup.
Yeah, and unfortunately for him, in a lot of his recent wins, it has been the latter, and it has been his ability to pull a finish out of thin air that has saved him. And that still makes him dangerous, but when that happens over and over, I said that as kind of a good thing for someone like Belal Muhammad, where we're still like learning what his attributes are. We know Boetsch is tough. We don't need him to put on performances where he's proving how tough he is. And unfortunately, that is the kind of performance he keeps having. He's getting his ass whooped, and then he comes back to steal the win. It's not a reliable way to go about winning fights.
It's true. I don't know. I'm still sticking by my Boetsch pick. I just feel it in my bones that
I don't think it's a bad pick.
That Natal, I just don't see Natal being dangerous enough. That's the thing for me.
You're absolutely right.
Natal's not dangerous, and I think he's willing to hang out inside, and he may be willing to hang out inside and try and grind on Boetsch. And if he does that, I think it'll just go really badly for him.
Yeah.
Boetsch is the underdog, plus 145 to plus 125. Natal, minus 147 down to minus 165.
What is Boetsch by KO?
Boetsch by knockout is plus 290 to plus 300.
I think that's worth a small bet.
Yeah. That does seem like the most likely way he would win. All right, that brings us to Khabib Nurmagomedov. I always want to just I just pronounce it like it's written. I don't stress the right
Nurmy.
thing.
We'll just call him Nurmy.
Yeah, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Michael Johnson.
Is this me?
I believe this is you.
I love this fight. I think this is a fantastic fight. And I think that if Michael Johnson weren't Michael Johnson, I would pick him here. Or at least I would really strongly consider it. And I'm still kind of considering it because Khabib Nurmagomedov, he seems to have all this momentum. He seems like this unstoppable wrestling machine. But, look at who he's fought. Look at the styles of the guys he's fought. I'm not saying that they're bad fighters. He's got a lot of impressive wins. But guys like Gleison Tebow, which is a fight, by the way, that I think Nurmagomedov absolutely won. I don't understand why that's been retconned into this really questionable decision when Tebow did nothing but defend takedowns, and that's why people think it was an amazing performance. Rafael dos Anjos, his best win. Abel Trujillo, Thiago Tavares. These are not guys who are comfortable fighting off the back foot. They're not guys whose main attribute is being able to stick and move and counterpunch. And that is Michael Johnson's best skill. We've seen a lot of pressure fighting from him recently in his career when it made sense to do so, like against Dariush, against Edson Barboza. But I think the Dustin Poirier fight, I'm really glad that he took that fight the way he did. He didn't come in and say, I'm going to go toe-to-toe with Dustin Poirier. He said, I'm going to make him chase me and hit him with good shots. And there was no moment of that fight. I know it was a quick knockout, and it's often hard to gauge a fighter's abilities based on something that only lasts a minute and a half. But there was no second of that fight that Michael Johnson didn't appear to be in control. I think he won every minute, every second, I guess, every minute and 35 seconds of that fight up until the KO. He was doing really well. And we've seen that from him before. To me, up until now, his best performances, the most confident performances, were the ones against Gleison Tebow, Joe Lozon. Guys who come forward, guys who press, and who he can use his excellent footwork against to walk them into shots. That is when he's obviously at his most powerful. He hurt all three of the guys that I just named, Poirier, Tebow, and Lozon, a lot of times in some cases. And Nurmagomedov is a pressure fighter, I think. He tends to strike with people a little bit at the beginning of each fight to kind of feel them out, but then he will come forward, either to set up his strikes with his takedowns or vice versa, usually the former. He obviously wants the takedown to happen. And Johnson does not have bad takedown defense at all. He's actually got really good takedown defense, and his fight metric percentage would be a lot stronger if it weren't for his early performances where he was so easy to take down. But he hasn't been taken down, I think, in 3 years or something like that, which is impressive. And he's a very good striker. One of the best Nurmagomedov has fought, especially one of the best at adapting to the style that Nurmagomedov prefers. Better in that regard, I think, than even Dos Anjos, who we've seen now a few times is not comfortable when he feels he can't pressure. You know, when he's so worried about the takedown that he can't pressure, he doesn't like fighting off the back foot. So that's tough. And also the Michael Johnson's fight with Nate Diaz, another one that's been retconned, close fight, genuinely a close fight. I was not actually 100% certain when that fight was over that the judges would give Nate Diaz the win, because even in the second round, which is when he began to take over, Johnson landed some big shots. He had some really good moments in that round, and it wasn't until the third that he looked completely lost. The problem for Johnson in that fight is one that the same one I see rearing its head here, which is that I don't think he keeps his nerve very well. I think he's a little emotional. He tends to get frustrated. We even in like the Edson Barboza fight, we saw him getting tired and frustrated. In the Dariush fight, we saw him get frustrated.
In the Guillard fight, in fact, that was a really weird performance. Yeah,
the Melvin Guillard fight, and definitely against Nate Diaz. We have seen him get frustrated with quite a few people now, and his game changed most dramatically in the Nate Diaz fight when he got frustrated. Now, Nate Diaz, like his brother, has a special power of getting on people's nerves more than most fighters. And so I think that is why the game plan change was so dramatic in that fight, because Johnson came in leg kicking, sticking and moving, pressuring in bursts. It was working beautifully in the first round. And then he gave up his kicking game and everything. He completely abandoned what was working so well for him when Diaz started to get inside his head. Nurmagomedov's not going to do that in the same way. But he's such a determined grappler that I think in the same way that Diaz's jabbing did or that Dariush's jabbing did, I think it will frustrate Johnson at some point, that he's just constantly being taken down. I don't think he'll deal with it maybe as badly as Abel Trujillo did, where he's just like throwing up his hands and being dragged to the ground, even as he's visibly showing signs of frustration. But I think that is a problem. And on the ground, I still don't have a ton of faith in Michael Johnson. We haven't seen a lot of really promising things on the ground from guys at the Black Zillions camp. And I know now they have, what's the new grappling coaches? Yeah. Is it Brian? David?
I thought it was Neil Melanson.
Yeah, Brian is the fighter, the retired fighter. Neil Melanson is a good grappling instructor. He seems to be making some strides, but until I see Michael Johnson actually do well on the ground, rather than just stopping all takedowns that come his way, I can't be confident in his grappling ability or how well he deals with the pressure on the ground. He could be like an Anthony Johnson who just completely loses heart when everything starts to turn against him. And so I'm picking Nurmagomedov for his relentlessness. I think that is going to impact the innate advantages of Michael Johnson, such that they kind of vanish at some point in the fight. But I think that Nurmagomedov is going to have a tough first round. And I think Johnson has a lot of edges that if he can keep them, he may have a better chance than anyone else Nurmagomedov has ever fought of getting the win.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, the thing that you also kind of left out of that too, for me, that makes this really tough is that, let's be totally honest, Nurmagomedov did not look good against Daryl Horcher.
No.
Like, that was just for a fight in which he was almost guaranteed to win, that was not a good performance. That is about as poorly as he could have done while still getting a TKO.
Yeah.
And that is a problem because also Horcher kind of fights a lot like how Michael Johnson fights, just
counterpunching, long range, lateral movement. Yeah, he's like a less well developed and less experienced Michael Johnson.
Yeah. And so that is
with worse takedown defense.
Yeah, with worse takedown defense. And that is a major problem in this fight because we are taking Nurmagomedov here on a lot of faith. You know, we are saying, I am sure this is going to still be the same guy he was 2 years ago before ACL surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he fights is so, like, he's got a ton of technique in his wrestling. There's no question about that. But because his striking is so janky, and because his striking is so janky, that's really it. His setups are not great. Like, they are really based on how athletic he is and on how athletic he still is.
Yeah, it's like the Roy Jones Jr. problem. His setups are smart. They make sense for him, but they have all developed based on what he can do that most people can't.
Yeah, like, he is blazingly fast and athletic and explosive. And in that Horcher fight, like, we saw his hand speed is still right there where it's supposed to be. But his entries, it took a while. Like, connecting his hand speed to his entries in the way that he used to be able to was not there in the same way.
I hold out hope that it was mostly ring rust.
Yeah.
But we have to entertain the possibility that a knee injury can be really tough for someone who relies on exploding to cover distance and to get their takedowns.
Yeah. So I'm picking Nurmagomedov too, but this very much has the feeling to me of that completely derailing upset loss where a fighter who was, who had been promised a title shot, who had won a ton of fights, who had all this momentum, finally just took that one extra fight that he probably shouldn't have or shouldn't have had to take on his way to a title, and thus doesn't get the title shot because he lost it.
Although at this point, it can't really say his case is any stronger than Tony Ferguson's.
No, it's not. It's not.
It's weaker, actually. It's considerably weaker.
It's weaker than Tony Ferguson's. The only strong point behind it is that he has a 0 next to his loss column. And a big part of that is that he went up fighting cans. That was...
yeah, he came up that way. The thing is, the unfortunate thing for Nurmagomedov is I think he would, even now, I think he would do pretty well against the guys who are currently in the title picture. Like, I don't doubt at all that Conor McGregor does not want to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I don't blame him. It's a really tough matchup for him. It's kind of a nightmare matchup for him. Even if Nurmagomedov loses to Johnson, Johnson is not as vulnerable to wrestling as McGregor has often seemed to be. So, or stamina problems. And that's not like Nurmagomedov is kind of like McGregor in that he does get tired, but typically because of his style, his opponent is always tireder than him.
Yeah.
so you never notice. Like when McGregor has you, like in a Chad Mendes situation, more exhausted than he is, you don't notice how gassed he is. But I think in that matchup, McGregor would eventually, if he didn't get the early finish, look more gassed than Nurmagomedov. But, if he can't get through Michael Johnson, he's not going to get the chance to get there for some time.
Yeah.
And he may have missed that opportunity altogether. So, and I do kind of feel like a chicken for picking Nurmagomedov because I think we've both laid out a pretty good case for a Michael Johnson win, but
yeah, it's tough because and part of the things, one of the reasons that I'm still willing to pick Nurmagomedov is in that Poirier fight, there were a couple moments where, and these are a couple moments because that fight was not very long, but where Johnson still has this habit of when he throws punches, he will still lift up his chin a bit and just kind of wing them out there. And if they miss, he's still there to get hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
And
he overextends. I think it's actually, this may not interest a lot of people, but I think it's a physiological thing with him. If you look at the way he stands, stands like an L stance. His feet are like this. Mm-hmm. And there's an important thing there because that kind of indicates that his hips are externally rotated, which is why I think Johnson's best shots are his hooks. His right hook is his most dangerous punch to the body, to the head. That's what he knocked out Poirier with. And because you need to open your hips to throw good hooks and good kicks, but straight punches, you need to close them. And guys with really good natural straight punching form tend to have their feet naturally aligned like this, more pointed inward. And so, like, he's not pigeon-toed enough, basically, to throw straight punches without falling forward. To get power into them, he has to put himself in a bad position because his body hasn't been corrected to the point where he can do it. And
and that's the kind of thing that Nurmagomedov can completely take advantage of. Yeah, because he's a takedown mashie. So
yes. Absolutely, much more so than Victor Pesta. He is a takedown machine.
All right. On that note, Nurmagomedov is the favorite, minus 250 to minus 300. Michael Johnson, the underdog, plus 252 to plus 190. And I got to think that Johnson's worth an underdog bet, frankly. Yeah. Like, I'm not comfortable enough with Nurmagomedov at this point to see those kind of odds.
No, me neither. I think at the straight odds, he's worth a bet. You might also consider Johnson by decision, because Nurmagomedov is very tough, and Johnson isn't that powerful, which is at plus 540 to plus 600.
I would just, honestly, if you can get Michael Johnson at plus 250, I would just go with that straight.
Sure. I already have bet on Michael Johnson here, so.
All right, that brings us to the final prelim bout, Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stephens. I'm really happy that Jeremy Stephens got this fight. I think he deserved it after the Renan Barão win. He deserved to get another shot at a really big name on a big card. He's got the wins behind him. He's a good, dangerous dude. I am also absolutely certain that he's going to lose this fight. Just because the style matchup is wretched for him. And despite being having a wrestling background, coming from Iowa, so there's no way that he didn't wrestle at some point.
Yeah.
Stephens has never been as good a defensive wrestler as he seems like he should be. Like, he's got this amazingly solid base. He's very set up and in position to stuff shots. And it's just like he takes it for granted that he's going to stuff the shot. So when you actually do shoot in on him, he's like, oh, shit, get taken down.
He's not as good a wrestler as it feels like he should be in any regard. For someone who's
he doesn't ever want to wrestle offensively, so that just doesn't matter.
For someone who's billed as a wrestle boxer, there's not a ton of wrestling you see in this game. Not more than is kind of like the bare minimum for success. And it helps that he's very strong, especially for this division.
But as a kickboxer, obviously he's super powerful, but he doesn't, he's not really fleet-footed. He's a chaser. He's not the best at cutting off the cage. And he's not so amazingly high output that he's just going to take over a bout with kickboxing if you don't want to kickbox with him. As you know, even as we've seen, like with his Max Holloway fight, Max Holloway didn't have to engage him all that much to beat him.
Yeah.
And Frankie Edgar, Frankie Edgar can move, stick and move, get in and out of range, and has become more and more brilliant over time at how he sets up his takedown entries. And, he will do things like in that Cub Swanson fight that I loved, where he like went in on these super half-hearted takedown attempts a couple of times just to see how Cub Swanson set up his defense. And then after that, he never missed a takedown for the rest of the fight.
He does like the Marlon Moraes and Edson Barboza thing, or like a Tarek Safadine, how they do with their low kicks, where they'll just like touch you to see if your defense is there before they really commit.
Yep.
Or if that means that if you are defending, they'll use that threat to set up something else. Frankie Edgar's whole game is about setting up transitions with different phases of his game. Go for half-hearted takedowns, punch you because you're defending them, and then threaten you with the punch and go for that classic knee tap of his. Everything is so layered with Frankie Edgar, and I think that is getting better and better with time.
Yeah, and Stevens he's gotten better at some of the fundamental things and, ways to use his power, but he's never put the layers in his game.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to pick Edgar here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Stevens has really impressed me as a featherweight. I think he, too, like Edgar, I think he's better than he ever was. I think, and really, I don't know if they did this despite me or not, but basically everything Alliance MMA has done in the past year or two has really made me look like a fool for criticizing them, because they've done a lot of good things with fighters. People like Eric Perez, obviously Dominic Cruz, but also like Jeremy Stevens, like who else has been training at Alliance? Another tough Latin America guy whose name escapes me right now. But they've done some impressive things with fighters, and I think maybe it feels like either I was off base in criticizing them in the first place, but to me, because I already have that set in my head, it seems like they're being less restrictive of what kind of style they let their fighters do. That maybe they have evolved to account more for people's natural abilities. And so somebody like Jeremy Stevens, who has actually been at Alliance for quite a while, but is really showing the fruits of it now, is not like a Dominic Cruz clone. He's not having the problem of a Phil Davis. Like one of my big criticisms of Alliance has always been based on the Phil Davis or the Norman Park. These guys that would probably be really good and feel more confident if they were allowed to be aggressive fighters. If they were allowed to actively pursue the clinch range that really suits them. And they look uncomfortable because that's not how they've been taught. Jeremy Stevens does not have that problem. He has been taught to be a better outfighter. His movement is better. His jab and his kicking game, all better. But he still is allowed and feels entitled to bite down and throw when he needs to. And that was the big thing in that Renan Barão fight. If he had allowed Barão to do what he did in the first round for any other, even one more minute of that fight, because Barão almost won the third, Stevens would have lost. But he didn't. The second round, he totally changed tactics. He's like, all right, I'm just going to swing on this motherfucker. I'm going to go after him and just throw heavy punches. And it changed the tone of the fight dramatically. And that could be a thing that he can do to Edgar, but it is tough to see Frankie Edgar breaking from a game plan that is working for him as easily as Renan Barão did. That's a new thing for Barão. It's something that is very against what his natural tendencies are, though I do think it's a good change for him. Frankie Edgar spent his whole career at lightweight, because he was the smaller man, learning to be a really good outfighter. And I think, again, everything is improving for him, his experience, his comfort. He seems to even be a little stronger here at featherweight and more powerful. Everything is clicking for him because he's been working on that for such a long time. You're not going to convince Frankie Edgar that his game plan isn't going to work just by going for a few seconds of wild flurries. Even if he gets clipped, he is going to stick to what he knows is the safest way to win the fight, the surest way to win the fight. And so I think it's really hard not to pick Frankie Edgar here.
And it's also worth noting, too, that Barao has a very good technical, underrated trip and drag game.
Yeah.
Like he's really good at pushing you up against the fence and then finding a way to sweep a leg or to pull you down if you're just going to leave him there, because he's a good athlete and he's got some good, really good basic technique there. But he's not a complicated shot wrestler.
No.
Barao's outside shot is not complex. It's a pretty standard, I'll get in on a power double that will push you back to the cage where I want you, and then from there I can work and drag you down.
Yeah.
That's nothing like what Frankie Edgar does. Frankie Edgar's shot game is really, really fantastic.
Yeah.
It is
and
one
nuanced
of the best.
and layered. It flows into the kind of game that Barao has, and it also flows into the kind of striking that Frankie Edgar's always been pretty good at. So, it's hard not, like I said, it's hard not to pick Frankie here. I like you. I'm glad Stevens gets this fight. I think it's a good fight, but I just don't envision Edgar like getting knocked out and definitely not being outpointed by Stevens.
Yep. Odds on this fight, Frankie Edgar is the favorite, -320 to -385. Jeremy Stevens, the underdog, +289 to +245. And I have no problem with those odds.
Oh, but I do think that one of the props is actually one of the stronger bets on this card. I think Edgar by decision is currently -124.
Ooh. Yeah, that is a nice prop. If you can get Edgar to win by decision at underdog odds.
Yeah, it's even anything relatively close to an even line, I think is good there, because Stevens is very tough and hard to finish.
Edgar's not a submission fighter at all.
No. Yeah, if he wins, it's going to be an impressive outpointing performance. That's the most likely thing of all the possibilities to me. So,
yep. That brings us to our pay-per-view card now. And opening bout on the pay-per-view, Meisha Tate versus Raquel Pennington.
Is this
me? That's you, baby.
Meisha Tate, Raquel Pennington. Like this fight probably more than most people do. I have my weird affinity for Raquel Pennington. I just admire her doggedness, and I tend to like journeyman-type fighters, journeywomen, I suppose, and she's one of those. She's not very athletic. She's strong, but like with explosiveness, speed, light in her feet, she's none of those things. She's got pretty quick hands. She knows how to use them pretty well. There's just this weird clunkiness to Rocky Pennington's game that for some reason has appealed to me for a very long time. And I like that. It makes her a tough fight for basically anybody. She's pretty good everywhere. Not especially dangerous everywhere, but she will absolutely make even the best fighters in the division work hard to beat her. And I think that will be the case here with Meisha Tate. But this is one of those fights, kind of like the Luque fight, where somebody well-rounded in Rocky Pennington and kind of aimless because of it sometimes goes against someone who has a really strong advantage in one or two areas. And I think that is Meisha Tate with her wrestling. Pennington is not easy to take down, but there aren't actually many better wrestlers in this division than Meisha Tate. And she has a bit of that Frankie Edgar thing too, where she's pretty good shot takedown artist, but pretty good at kind of scrambling mid-takedown to change up. She's got chain wrestling in her arsenal. We saw that in the Holly Holm fight. We've seen it in many others. And then, again, Pennington's not very dangerous, but also Meisha's very tough. And her tendency to take early punishment is not going to be as big of a problem for her here as it would be against other fighters, because it's very, Pennington's not going to knock her out. So Tate is going to be able to adjust and find the very real openings in Rocky Pennington's game. And I think Meisha Tate will probably win by decision. A submission would not shock me either.
The biggest downside for Tate, honestly, at this point in her career, is that she does not tend to take strikes well from power strikers. Like, if somebody can hit her hard, they can scare her.
Yes.
She gets hit hard, she will freeze up and just and stop working. That's kind of, we saw that against Amanda Nunes. We've seen that against even Ronda Rousey at times. I think there were points where Rousey hit her hard enough that it just kind of froze up her striking game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and we've seen it against Kat Zingano, too. It's just, but Pennington's not that person. Like, Pennington is not going to put a scare into you with her punches. She doesn't commit well enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think she wants to be a more dynamic fighter than she is probably the biggest problem there, which means that she moves in ways that take a lot of steam off of her strikes. And Tate, I just... The problem with Tate's wrestling has been that she doesn't necessarily, and this is a problem I think that a few women have had with wrestling. It's a reason, and it may just be like a natural physiological thing. And one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of good power takedown artists in women's MMA is that when Tate drops, she tends to drop down, like she tends to drop her knees to the canvas at or before she hits her opponent's hips. So she can lose a lot of momentum on power double. Like, she hit a great power double against, who was it she fought last? Against Amanda Nunes in that fight. A really good power double leg. But it was so, like, she had to put so much behind it that she totally lost control of Nunes when she did it. And most of the time, what we've seen is she'll drop down and it'll be like, oh man, she got a great entry on that. And then there's no momentum, and then she has to chain wrestle her way through it. And she's a very good chain wrestler, and she gets it done. But yeah, I just don't see, somebody, I remember a couple weeks ago, somebody was trying to talk me into the idea that Pennington has a striking edge over Meisha Tate. It's like, maybe she strikes more, but part of that is she doesn't wrestle as well, so she kind of has to strike more.
And she's a crisper striker. She's got like snappy, often arm punches, but like Tate has, I think, that a really good instincts for striking.
Yeah, and I wouldn't give Pennington... The big thing with Pennington is that she tends to be bigger and tougher than a lot of people, and she knows when and how to use that to bully people. And I don't think that's going to work for Tate. Tate is, like I say, unless you can hurt her standing, she seems very hard to bully.
Yeah.
And I think her wrestling game... Like, a lot of the technical aspects of her game, her wrestling and striking, have actually improved just in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So I gotta go with Tate here, pretty handily. I think this is her fight to lose unless something really weird happens.
Yeah.
Meisha Tate is the favorite, -164 to -195. Pennington, the underdog, +160 to +130. Frankly, I think those odds are a little narrow.
Tate may very well be worth a bet at those odds.
Yeah. Under 200, Tate's a much cleaner, more consistently round-winning fighter when she's on her game, and when she isn't, it tends to be because she's facing an athletic freak that can just totally throw her off from moment one. And Pennington is not Holly Holm or Ronda Rousey or Kat Zingano in that way.
Yeah.
Or Amanda Nunes, for that matter. So that brings us to our second bout on the pay-per-view card, Kelvin Gastelum versus Donald Cerrone. This is a very interesting fight. Cerrone has looked fantastic at welterweight. It looks like his technical kickboxing has really taken a step forward that is kind of shocking, because he's been around long enough and he's been fighting for long enough that the last thing you would have really expected from Donald Cerrone was that his technical striking was going to take a big leap forward.
Yeah.
That said, I'm going with Kelvin Gastelum here. And the biggest reason is that I think this is finally a physical matchup that just does not favor Cerrone at all. Rick Story is a hell of a fire plug and a very powerful fighter, but he's also a really undersized welterweight and somebody that Cerrone was able to, I think, really physically compete with.
He also didn't. I think the big thing with Story is he didn't press what might have been a physical advantage in the same way that we expected him to when we picked him.
This is true. He certainly was unable to press a body punching advantage in.
He didn't pressure really at all. He kind of kickboxed with Cerrone at range, which was kind of confusing.
And Gastelum is weirdly actually shorter than Rick Story, but kind of another half person bigger.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly fast and athletic. Like, watching his fight with Johnny Hendricks, like, you really get a sense of just how much speed and power Gastelum can put into his game when he's on weight, when he's had a good camp, when everything is flowing. He's a very crisp fighter. And I think that he's going to be able to pressure and press Cerrone in a way that is just not going to give Donald the room to get comfortable like he has in recent fights. And one of the things we've seen, too, in recent fights is Cerrone pressing a wrestling advantage, an offensive wrestling advantage, which, like, just totally caught Story off guard entirely and Cote off guard entirely. And Gastelum doesn't square up the same way Story does. He doesn't leave himself open for that offensive takedown in a way that just caught Story off guard. I think when Story was trying to square up I think that's what really took a lot of the pressuring wind out of Rick Story's sail, was just suddenly like, okay, I'm set to try and pressure you, and I've taken 2 steps forward, and you just hit me with a power double, and I'm on my ass scrambling back up. And Gastelum is just too compact and powerful for that. I don't see Cerrone out wrestling him, and if he doesn't, I think that, then at the same time we saw Story on top of Cerrone, and with some time to work. And I think in those kind of positions, Gastelum can do a lot more damage. So I just feel like this is where that physical advantage of being a middling between middleweight and welterweight has a lot more meaning for a guy like Cerrone, who was straddling welterweight and lightweight.
Sure.
So I'm picking Gastelum here.
Yeah, I mean, essentially you're saying that this is finally the guy who's going to do to Cerrone what we've been suspecting welterweights will do to him now since he went to this division. And I have basically flipped to say, I'm going the James Vick line of thought and saying, until I actually see a guy I expect to have those edges over Cerrone, I'm not going to pick them anymore, because he has really sold me on how well he can adapt to bigger, stronger fighters. Even though he didn't press it that well, and I think that may have had something to do, like you just suggested, with Cerrone's takedown game. Rick Story had a lot of the classic anti-Cerrone weapons in his arsenal, and he didn't even get a chance to get them off. I said before that was confusing, but maybe we have to give the credit to that to Cerrone. Taking those weapons away, not being in the same range he was, not being as easy to pressure because his footwork has gotten better, as has his counter punching and his counter wrestling, and definitely being more dangerous, especially with his striking, than he ever has been in his career. And Kelvin Gastelum, he's definitely very close, like I thought Story was, to the kind of fighter that I would expect to beat Donald Cerrone. He's a southpaw. He attacks the body. He pressures. He's a fast starter. Like, these are all the things that have traditionally given Donald Cerrone trouble. But, I don't know. Cerrone, I just think Cerrone's game is developing to the point where it is harder to make those advantages count.
The big thing I will say in this case that really differs Gastelum from Story to me is their comfort at range and the volume they can work in at range.
For sure.
Gastelum, he will like double or triple up on a jab and come in with a power right hand that closes distance really well for him, or a power left hand rather. He's a southpaw that closes distance really well for him. And there's a speed and comfort there that and a length there that I think for Story, like he can start fast and he can do really well inside, but if it was just going to be floating around at range, didn't really see a lot in Rick Story's game to catch Donald Cerrone out. And I think Donald Cerrone was able to find a lot of comfort outside, just waiting and just being like, I can just hang out here and try to figure out what I want to do next, because you want to get inside. Like you can't hang out here with me. You can't afford to be out here with me.
Yeah, I think, Gastelum doesn't leave himself open as long as Story sometimes does, but I do also think he is often very open. He could be Rafael Cordero's new wunderkind. I think he's that athletically talented, especially now that Rafael dos Anjos has left, although I hope maybe after the Ferguson loss he will decide to go back. His corner didn't seem to be working that well for him against Ferguson or giving him much helpful advice. But Gastelum could be, but we have to acknowledge too that one thing that Rafael Cordero has never done all that well is defense. He has never produced fighters who are really hard to hit. He has produced a lot of fighters who kind of play metagame. They game the fact that they are easy to hit by putting on so much pressure and being so confident and being so aggressive. They kind of bank on the notion that if you see the punch coming, 90% of the time it's not going to hurt you that badly or knock you out. If you know it's coming and you're confident in your ability to take it, why not take it and then drive through with your own shots? And if you do that enough, the other guy's going to stop throwing or he's going to lose faith in his own punches. Confidence is the big thing with Rafael Cordero. I've said that many times, as has he. And Gastelum can do that. But, I mean, not to play MMA math, but we're comparing to how he's a much better opponent for Cerrone than Rick Story. Rick Story almost beat Kelvin Gastelum. And he hurt him really badly a few times in that fight. He had him knocked down, I think, twice in the first or second round, or at least staggered once and then knocked down. And I kind of remember thinking Story won that fight. So, Gastelum's not invulnerable. He fights like a guy who's invulnerable, and that is a big strength. But against an ever-improving counterpunching game of Donald Cerrone's, I don't know. It's it's a tough one. I'm going to pick Cerrone just because I think he's got that momentum. I think he and Brandon Gibson and as always, Greg Jackson are really clicking as a team right now, and we're seeing that in how he's improving and how confidently he's dealing with what should be kind of tough matchups. And Gastelum, I'm not 100% sold on his confidence with the Rafael Cordero approach just yet. He looked really, really bothered by Neil Magny's reach when they fought. And Donald Cerrone's better at keeping people at range than Neil Magny. He's better at using his jab and his footwork, especially now, and his counters. Magny kind of collapses when you close that gap. When you make any effort to close that gap, he's not that confident. Cerrone is, more so now than ever. So it's basically when I see Gastelum beat Cerrone, I will have confidence in him as a welterweight contender. When I see Cerrone beat Gastelum, or until I see Cerrone lose to a guy like Gastelum, I'm just going to keep on picking him as a welterweight.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I guess I also just feel like without the recent wrestling advantages and wrestling ability that he's shown to be able to get that over in a fight, I don't know that Cerrone can create the same opportunities in his striking that he's also been able to open up.
Gastelum's not an amazing takedown defender though. He's maybe not like, it seems more shocking, I think, when Rick Story gets taken down because he is such a good wrestler. But I think Gastelum's takedown defense is in the 60s, 60th percentile, somewhere around there on Fight Metric. He's a good scrambler. But he does get taken down by guys with good timing. So,
yeah,
will it change his game as much as it seems to have done for Rick Story? Probably not.
Yeah, and we'll see. I'm feeling this Gastelum pick after watching the tape on him. So I'm going with it.
Once again, like that is the story for this card. Totally reasonable to pick either guy in almost every single one of these fights.
Gastelum is the underdog, however, plus 140 down to plus 125. Cerrone, the favorite, minus 152 to minus 165. Or minus 175. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about those odds. They're probably fine. My feeling that Gastelum wins makes me feel like you should pick him, but Gastelum's also had he's had his problems in the cage.
To me, it really kind of feels like a fight that feels like a fight that should just be even lines, and neither of these are far enough from that for me to see a ton of value.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel too. All right, that brings us to a middleweight bout: Chris Weidman versus Yoel Romero. And this is you, I believe.
This is me again. It feels like it's been me for every fight.
Was it? I thought I started out picking.
I think you did because I think I just spoke about it, but I talked too much anyway. So
no,
that's why
this is you.
Okay. It's so hard for me to keep track of my head because I'm constantly engaging with you when you're making your picks. So I'm like, wait, I just talked a lot. I guess I'm just a terrible interrupter. Middleweight fight: Chris Weidman, Yoel Romero. Tough to call for a slightly different reason than the other fights here. I have confidence that Chris Weidman is going to get better. I think he is a prodigal athlete who seems to pick up skills really well. We saw that, of course, with his rapid ascension from novice to excellent submission grappler. When he, it's like a legend, the legend of Chris Weidman now. He won 9 straight matches all by decision at Naga, and then he went to like a close fight with Andre Galvao after 1 year of jiu-jitsu against a 2-degree black belt. The legend of Chris Weidman as this grappling prodigy. But that's a good sign for him. It basically shows that he picks things up really well. He's got a natural affinity for things, and he's always done well, I think, when the pressure is on, when a fight really matters. He's obviously very tough. Even the loss to Luke Rockhold proves that he never at any point did he go out after absorbing a hellacious amount of punishment in a very short period of time. I also think that's another fight that's been kind of retconned to seem more one-sided than it was. In fact, if I recall, I think Weidman was winning the 3rd round before, of course, the fateful and notorious wheel kick, which was countered with a Rockhold takedown.
He was doing well in that round, and then he threw that wheel kick, and then he got taken down, and then he became tired, and then he was fucked.
Because they were both gassing in that fight. They were both gassing from just kicking each other in the body over and over again, but Weidman was doing more body kicking in the 3rd round than Rockhold. Weidman has been working with Mark Henry. He is the 3rd Mark Henry-trained fighter on this card. I have really high hopes for what that means for Chris Weidman going forward, because I think the biggest problem for him, I have respect for Ray Longo as a trainer, but the biggest problem for him was not having great defense or combination punching or using his jab enough even. We had good, really fundamental stuff, but he was never able to build on those fundamentals. Chris Weidman never became a better striker in any marked way after the first Anderson Silva fight. He basically maintained. And Chris Weidman, with strong wrestling, power in his hands, great submission skills, strong clinch fighting, and any amount of improvement on his boxing, that is a really, really solid, well-rounded fighter. So Mark Henry trains people with good fundamentals who are round winners, who fight smart and strategically to their strengths. And I would love to see that happen for Chris Weidman. It basically makes him the more dependable, the guy who I already feel like is the more dependable fighter in this matchup, more dependable, if that's true. And he not only worked with Mark Henry for this camp, but for the camp prior to the Rockhold rematch, which he had to pull out of last minute. And he's been working in between camps as well. So it's basically been like a year and a half of training under Mark Henry since that Luke Rockhold loss. And so I hope to see some major improvements. And then we have Yoel Romero, who is a complete physical freak, just a ridiculous, explosive athletic specimen, who is surprisingly light on his feet for a guy with his build, who can throw like a Yoel Romero is not one of those MMA fighters who would be embarrassed when you watched him do a try to dunk a basketball. I'm sure he could do it. His flying knees are like a 10-foot vertical. He just levitates when he jumps off the ground. Obviously well known too for like his crazy ankle pick takedowns, his insane takedown defense. His scrambling is absurd because anything that requires a really fast twitch response, Yoel Romero can do that really, really well. But he is such a weird fighter. His mindset he's like a space case. He just kind of doesn't care at all about winning rounds. He just kind of wants to hit you with something big. And he really prefers that to his wrestling, to the point where he was reportedly not at all training wrestling for the first several years of his MMA career, kind of expecting that it would just maintain because he was such a phenomenal wrestler. And he's fixed that. His wrestling is now once again a strength, but he has never shown consistency as a fighter. You know, anyone who is durable enough or good enough technique-wise to match Romero, he has never had a convincing performance against that kind of person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Lyoto Machida is the closest he's come, and I have strong feelings that Lyoto Machida is probably faded. I think that Chris Weidman fight was his last hurrah. And then we have, like, Derek Brunson had a close fight with Romero. Tim Kennedy had a close fight with Romero and almost knocked him out. Jacare had a close fight with Romero that many people think Jacare deserved to win. Yoel Romero has never gone in there against a top middleweight and blown them out of the water. And I can't pick that against Chris Weidman. Even after the loss, even after another injury, I can't pick that against Chris Weidman, especially because Weidman has a reputation for gassing, but he does not gas as badly as Yoel Romero. We have seen Weidman push through tiredness. He's a guy who looks like he's used to getting tired. He's used to doing endurance sports and doesn't mind. His game still works when he's tired. Yoel Romero shuts down even more than usual when he gets tired. And you can't leave out the possibility that because he's so dangerous that he could get Chris Weidman out of there at any point in this fight. But that possibility becomes less and less as the fight goes on. And it's already less against Weidman than it would be against other fighters because, again, Weidman is one of those top middleweights. Weidman is also one of the toughest top middleweights in terms of how much punishment he can take. So I feel really confident, and I'm not. I sound really confident, and I don't feel that way, but I just don't really see a reliable path to victory for Romero.
Worth noting, I will say this, Yoel Romero is actually one of the few fighters who the chances of him getting you out of there does not actually drop as the fight goes on.
Sure.
He has, let's see, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 third-round knockouts in his career. It's just, but his work rate does drop. The weird thing
somehow he still gets the late knockouts when the game that supports them definitely goes away when he gets tired.
Yeah, and it's just because he's such a physical freak and because his style of fighting is so much like, I'm watching you and I see 30 ways to hurt you and I might choose one of them or none of them. Yeah. And like, it doesn't matter how far along whoever's fighting him is in the fight or what they're doing. Like, they can have a punch that's like a centimeter from his face. And he'll just be like, okay, I'm just going to slip that this time and counter with an uppercut that'll knock you out. And that's fine. Or I'm just going to take the punch. I don't know. We'll find out. Like, I've got this millisecond to figure that out. And I'll do one or the other and whatever I feel like. And that's how he fights. It's always like it's like he sees the whole universe and it's just like, do I actually want to get do I actually want to take that star or do I want to just drift in space for a while?
Yoel Romero is the indecisive Dr. Manhattan of MMA.
He is. He absolutely is. Like, you watch his fights and you'll be watching him and you're like, what is he doing? And then suddenly, like, oh my God, how did he do that? That said, Weidman, like, I think part of the good thing for Weidman here is that he is unlikely to get a fight that pushes him past the point of his cardio. Like, Yoel Romero is unlikely to push Chris Weidman in the way that Luke Rockhold or even Lyoto Machida did.
Yeah.
Where late in those fights, Weidman notably flagged.
He will do that in like a 10-second version. Or like, yeah. I do think a lot of those late finishes, like the Tim Kennedy fight, Romero does realize the fight's close, or the Brunson fight.
Yeah.
He does realize the fight's close. He realizes he might not be winning. And he's like, all right, I'm just going to throw all caution out the window and just run after this person and be so powerful and fast and so relentless that they can't do anything about it. But Lyoto Machida had to come after Chris Weidman for a whole 2 rounds to have a real effect. You know what I mean? Like, especially because Weidman's so comfortable as a pressure fighter, I think you really have to pressure him to be effective against him. And
Yoel Romero is not going to pressure Chris Weidman.
No, pressure is not just aggression. Pressure requires consistent aggression.
Yeah. So, and the weird thing is, though, it's like, I mean, Yoel Romero is decidedly more athletic than Chris Weidman.
Which is saying something, because Chris Weidman's not a bad athlete.
No, Chris Weidman's a good athlete. But Romero is definitely more athletic and could absolutely just throw a flying knee and wreck his world.
Yep.
But I'm picking Weidman. I do like that he's working with Mark Henry. And Romero just doesn't do enough in any one round to make sure he's won it if he hasn't stopped you.
Yeah.
And that is not going to work against Weidman. I don't.
Yeah, and Weidman is distinctly less vulnerable than guys like Tim Kennedy and Derek Brunson to like a sudden finish.
Yeah.
He's never experienced one. You're not going to suddenly finish Chris Weidman unless you get very, very lucky.
Yeah, and it's I gotta pick. You gotta pick Weidman here, but you have to know going into that pick that Romero absolutely has every chance at any point in the 3 rounds of this fight to knock him cold. So
it may, again, another hidden advantage besides working with Mark Henry of that layoff, maybe that Chris Weidman has recovered more from the beating he took from Rockhold. He got more time to maybe rest. It may have had some, we don't really know how chin works that well, but it does seem that guys who return too quickly after being knocked out are often more susceptible the second time. And he's had a nice long layoff and nice 2 long training camps with time between to ensure that probably won't be a problem.
Indeed. Odds on this fight, Weidman is the favorite, -172 to -185. Yoel Romero, the underdog, +158 to +138. I don't know that there's a bet there. Those odds don't feel wrong to me in the circumstances. Romero is just too dangerous to bet against, or to like really be a huge underdog. He's too dangerous. He's too athletic. The only thing I would say to go with that is Romero wins by KO. TKO is +330. And that it may be worth a prop bet, because if he's winning this fight, it is almost certainly going to be because he knocks Chris Weidman out.
I am with that. I think that would be a wise bet.
That brings us to the first of our 3 title fights. My God, this card is huge, and it's impossible to not spend as much time talking about it as we have.
I think we've done pretty well, Zane,
considering we're doing pretty well. First title fight of the night, women's strawweight, Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Perhaps the easiest of the 3 title fights to call. I love this fight. It's a great matchup. Kowalkiewicz is a great contender for the belt. But I remember hearing on the UFC 205 promo, which means it's absolutely worthless, but just as a starting point for the conversation, Joe Rogan did that typical, if you were going to craft a perfect challenger for Joanna Jedrzejczyk, it would be Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And it's like, actually, it would be Claudia Gadelha. Honestly, if we're being real here, like, Jedrzejczyk just faced the perfect challenger for her, which is somebody who has more power than her, who has a good dynamic wrestling game, and who's probably a purely better athlete.
Yeah. Stronger, more powerful, good wrestler. Basically, if you were going to craft a perfect challenger, the one quality you would take from Kowalkiewicz would be her stamina, and you would give it to Claudia Gadelha.
Exactly. Otherwise, Kowalkiewicz she's good at all the same things that Jedrzejczyk is better at.
Yeah.
And her best area is the clinch, and she's an underrated, crafty grappler. but not an exceptional, like, she's not like some grappling wizard. She's had a couple submissions, but most of them have been like, she's got one rear naked choke and one arm bar, and that's it. She's otherwise kind of a split decision machine. She's somebody that, she takes a good shot. She's durable. She's not terrible at range, but she's not. It really opens up her defensive liabilities when she's on the outside. Her head movement's very static. She tends to come in on straight lines. So when she's way outside, people can see her coming a mile away. Rose Namajunas was able to plunk her more than a few times, and really it was Kowalkiewicz's toughness that saw her go through that.
Not just her toughness, but Rose's kind of fragility.
Rose's fragility and Rose's willingness to give up the fight she was winning for a fight that she was losing.
Michael Johnson syndrome.
Yeah. And Jedrzejczyk doesn't have that problem. She's a better outside striker by a mile, and she's a better clinch fighter. Like, she's a more diverse, more technical striker in the clinch, where being diverse and technical really matters. Kowalkiewicz is able to press a small technical advantage into the very specific techniques. Like, she can control a tie plum for good knees. She can land, press you up against the cage and land good elbows. But she's not doing a lot of the Matt Brown-esque overbalancing, shifting, and sort of dynamic trickery in the clinch that really makes a clinch game where you're like, oh my God, this is art. And that's much more like what Joanna's clinch game is like. It's sort of, she'll get you feeling the clinch one way and defending one way just to land a huge knee or a huge elbow in the complete opposite direction, where all of your weight and pressure is leaning and none of your defense is going. And I don't see Kowalkiewicz having the physicality inside to press Joanna, because that's, Joanna's not the most physically imposing fighter, and she can be physically pressured in the clinch, but I don't see that from Kowalkiewicz being this like massive physical force inside to really make Joanna have to think too hard there. So this just seems like a reasonably cut and dried fight for a card full of close fights. That Joanna's tough enough, Carolina's not a good finisher, not a good enough finisher, and then when it comes down to the technical game, Jedrzejczyk's got it in spades.
Yeah, I compared. This probably sounded crazy to people, and I think I even said that at the time. But I compared Karolina Kowalkiewicz after the Rose Namajunas fight to Marcos Maidana. She reminded me of him because she has a couple things that always made Marcos Maidana a really tough out. She's very, very durable. She seems to be. Granted, we haven't really seen her against a lot of power punchers, especially not in the UFC when she's faced a lot of her best competition. But she's durable mentally as well as physically. She's very difficult to dissuade. She will keep pressing. Also, like Maidana, she has a natural instinct for winning tactics. If you show Kowalkiewicz that something is working, or if she forces an opening out of you, and she will press it to the end. She realized Rose Namajunas was vulnerable to her in the clinch. She absolutely went after it. She realized that Ronda Marcos was vulnerable to her leg kicks. She went after it. She sees an opening. She will attack it until it stops working, and then probably a little after it stops working to see if it was a fluke that you defended it the one time. And I think there's actually even a parallel there to one of Marcos Maidana's best performances, which was his win over Adrian Broner, because like Rose Namajunas, there were a lot of things that Adrian Broner could do that should have beaten Marcos Maidana, but he couldn't stick to them. He lost his cool. And so it was, in fact, in that sense, a perfect matchup for Maidana, because his ruggedness allowed him to look oftentimes like the more technical fighter in a lot of ways. And I don't think that will at all be the case against Joanna Jedrzejczyk. The only person, like you said, Jedrzejczyk basically does everything that Kowalkiewicz does better. She's one of the few fighters in the division who throws more volume than Kowalkiewicz. while being faster and I think a little more powerful at the same time.
And cleaner, technically.
Cleaner. Yeah, and I think that's probably going to get better at ATT. It remains to be seen. It may have been a bad switch for her, but my suspicion, looking at her pad work and stuff like that, is that they are going to make her a better defensive fighter, improve her footwork some, improve her setups, and make her, because the one big problem for her for the past few fights has been that she throws a lot of volume without moving her head or changing angles once she starts attacking. So it's like she really wants to throw combinations, but it's these bursts, and you can tag her with something at the end of the combination because she's right there. And if that gets any better, then she's going to become only more difficult to beat. And ATT also really does takedown defense really well. So it's pretty much impossible for me to see Kowalkiewicz getting her down.
I got to think, too, Joanna feels like one of those fighters who doesn't leave anything behind. Like, I don't see her being the kind of fighter who's like, oh, I've changed camps and now I've lost these skills. You know, if she feels very much like the kind of fighter who every fight we've seen has been adding to the game that she already has. Like, she just, she doesn't tend to drop anything.
Yeah, and in another sense of not leaving anything behind, she leaves nothing behind in the cage. She is, again, one of the few fighters in the division who can not only compare to Kowalkiewicz's mental ruggedness, but probably surpasses it. There are a lot of fighters in 5-round fights, all fighters in the division, I'm going to say, who would have broken after the first 2 rounds against Claudia Gadelha. Or even after the 3rd round, which was the first round where Jedrzejczyk started to take over, and then Gadelha continued to have moments. So it may have seemed to a lot of other fighters like, I'm not coming back in this fight. I can't win this one. They would have gotten desperate. They would have lost their confidence. They would have started to get reckless. Jedrzejczyk is very special in her ability to go through a challenge and just continue pressing and continue working her advantage. And it's, of course, aided by the fact that she has remarkable conditioning. The fact that she went that fight with Gadelha at such a pace, throwing so many strikes, defending so many takedowns, getting knocked down in the first round, she was Demetrius Johnson-esque in the 5th round in how not tired she looked. She looked fine. And Gadelha, especially in comparison to Gadelha, who, like any normal human being, was completely dead tired after the pace of that contest. And so, like, Kowalkiewicz doesn't have the stamina advantage. She doesn't have the volume advantage. She's even more hittable than Joanna, especially when she comes in, because she has this weird, like a lot of female fighters, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I think it may be more difficult for women to learn good punching mechanics. I just think maybe there's a disconnect I see in a lot of female fighters between their hips and their legs and their hands, where they don't quite get the throwing. You know, it's like the very offensive throwing like a girl stereotype.
Well, it may be one of those cultural things of just the differences in people who grow up with a lot of athletic activity, and the fact that a lot of women end up having to come to more like physical contact athletic activity later in life. Because
I think that is very much part of the story, that, you know, like in high schools across the country, the girls' teams tend to get underfunded more than the boys' teams. And in the MMA world, the women tend to have a harder time getting into top gyms, or tend to maybe settle for gyms that aren't that good because they feel they don't belong in the top gyms. But there are definitely physical differences between men and women in MMA. I think that may be a reason why, like you were saying, Meisha Tate has trouble driving through, and you see that with a lot of female fighters who are takedown artists. And you see a lot of head and arm throws, and I think it may just be something that's easier for women to make work than it is for men. The hip toss is like, look at Ronda. Look how many great female judokas we have in this country alone. That seems to be something women do really well, whereas wrestling, not so much. Still more of a men's sport. So there are a lot of things going on there, but Kowalkiewicz looks more like a women's bantamweight fighter in terms of like her striking technique. She's very smart in how she applies it. She throws a lot of volume. She keeps a good pace, but she doesn't look like an athletic puncher. And Jedrzejczyk does. She looks like someone who has been taught very well how to move her body when she strikes, and has a good kinetic chain behind all of those strikes, where Kowalkiewicz often does not. I think that's getting a little better for Karolina with time, but it's already been getting better for a much longer time and at a faster rate for Jedrzejczyk. I don't want to make it sound like I think this fight will be a blowout, because I kind of see this being a close but clear fight all the way. Just because Kowalkiewicz is so hard to get out of there and does not stop coming after her opponents and will continue looking for ways to win. But I think in doing that, she is always going to be getting hit by Joanna more than she can hit Joanna. So I think, again, it does feel like one of the easier ones to pick, even though I think that does discredit what Kowalkiewicz does well.
It could be a competitive 50-45 is what we're saying.
That's what I think. Like it'll be like Barnett Cormier, where it's like Cormier wins every round, but the fight's pretty close all the way through, and Barnett constantly has moments in every round. One of those kind of fights. Kowalkiewicz is going to be in there. She's going to be trying. She's very good. And that's going to be to her advantage. It's just that there is no phase or range or athletic attribute in which she actually does have an advantage over Jedrzejczyk. So it's, or mental attributes. Like, I just don't see it. So I think you have to pick Jedrzejczyk. I think it'll either be a decision or it may be a late knockout if Jedrzejczyk can really attrit Kowalkiewicz with counter shots and run her into pot shots over and over for the fight up to that point, or hit her in the body a lot. It could be a late knockout for Jedrzejczyk, and that is my pick, actually.
Yeah, odds are Jedrzejczyk is the favorite, -392 to -420. Kowalkiewicz, the underdog, +342 down to +285. I hate to say that -410 or -420, 490 even odds are too close. But honestly, -398 on Joanna, like, it would be stunning to me if Kowalkiewicz won this fight. Having seen enough Ronda Rousey fights where she was at like -1200, it's just like, this feels a little more like that to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, to me, I've said this before. Pretty much anything beyond like plus and minus 300, 400, to me, all that says is it's a lopsided fight.
Yeah.
All that says is that for people who are really confident in Joanna, they still have some slight reason to maybe bet on her. Like you might have bet on Mayweather when his odds were slightly close, like in the Canelo fight.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, like past that point, I don't really tend to argue very strongly. Like, this should be a -1,000 favorite, even if I do feel very confident that Jedrzejczyk will win.
You can get, if you believe strongly in the Jedrzejczyk by TKO KO, and I would not, but if you do, you can get that at +300. But
yeah, that may be worth a very small bet just because it's underdog odds and pretty big underdog odds.
Kowalkiewicz is stupid tough, and Jedrzejczyk, honestly, a lot of people, she does not finish that many durable fighters, frankly.
No, she's not a power puncher. The people she finishes are like grapplers who look pretty clueless on the feet. Yeah. So
So I would not even pick that. It's just out there in case you're desperate. And that brings us to the second title fight of the night, Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Thompson.
This one, when you said it was the last one was the easiest title fight to call, I almost brought this up because I do like the last fight in a lot of ways. I kind of find it hard to pick Tyron Woodley here. I'm one of the few people in the MMA sphere, apparently, who really likes Tyron Woodley. Maybe it's the contrarian in me, but I think Tyron Woodley is like a savvy, smart guy. Having interviewed him on Heavy Hands, I think he's very well spoken. He knows what he's talking about. He's respectful. He's a family man. He's entrepreneurial. He's opening his gym. He's been starring in movies and stuff. I don't see any reason to not respect and admire Tyron Woodley. A lot of the hate, I guess, comes from the fact that, I don't know why, people are like, oh, how dare he call out Nick Diaz instead of the deserving contenders. Like, why not try? You know what I mean? Like, say, all right, I want a money fight. I want to be on 205 against a big name fighter, Nick Diaz. Let's do it. when it didn't happen, he's like, all right, I'll fight Stephen Thompson. I don't understand getting that upset about it. You know what I mean? He didn't even go through with it, didn't get the chance like Michael Bisping did. And I'm not upset at Michael Bisping for doing the Hendo fight. It's fine. Give him his chance to get like his one revenge fight or his one money fight. Let the man cash in. And it didn't happen. And now he's fighting the best contender in the division, the one on the longest winning streak with the most momentum. Everything is happening the way everyone who claims that to be their reasoning for hating Tyron Woodley said that it wouldn't. You know what I mean? So get over it. Tyron Woodley's a cool dude. He's too limited, I think, to beat Stephen Thompson. Tyron Woodley, there's a lot of nuance to his game based on his athletic abilities. He's incredibly fast, incredibly powerful. I said a while ago that he's probably the best athlete in this division, and I think that's probably still true. In the way that we typically use athlete, he's so dynamic, and he knows how to use it. But he is also one of those fighters who I think has, in a way, been handicapped by his athleticism because he has not developed the kind of game that can consistently win him rounds when he doesn't get the knockout punch. He's got a lot of good things in his game. He's very good defensively. People never give him credit for that, and I will never stop railing on about how he's actually really hard to hit clean. But in being defensive, he often gives up his positioning in the cage. And because he has that habit and because he lacks a jab and a really nuanced feinting system and like really good urgency to get off the fence and the footwork necessary to do it, he can't get out of that position very well, you know. And when it's just there's not enough technical complexity to Tyron Woodley's game to make him a consistent fighter. And he makes up for that by being this guy who explodes across distance and blinds you to what he's going to do better than anybody else. But a smart fighter knows it's going to be the right hand. Or it's going to be the right kick, but it's going to be like this big power shot, and it's fast and it's hard and it covers distance really quickly. But Stephen Thompson, there is no fighter in this division who better enforces a long distance than Stephen Thompson. There is nobody against whom it is more difficult to close the gap than Wonderboy. He will almost always choose the stance opposite to that of his opponent. He'll put himself in southpaw here against Tyron Woodley just to get his front foot in the way of Tyron's and make it even harder for him to set up in a middle distance. He will keep his sidekick on him and keep his jab on him and move and keep his back off the cage so he can't get cornered and you can't just step in without running into something. And he will stifle Tyron Woodley at a range that even he cannot easily cover with a big explosion. And my feeling here is that it will probably be kind of a dull fight. I think that Tyron Woodley he's got the leg kicks. That is one thing I don't think I acknowledged enough in my like Sherdog preview and in my other discussions about this. That could be a really big weapon if he presses it. Thompson seems vulnerable. The side stance is always vulnerable to leg kicks. But aside from that, I don't see Woodley having the ability to work with Thompson at range. And I don't see Thompson being confident enough in stepping through against a puncher like Woodley to like get him out of there. Very, very much not early in the fight. So in my Sherdog preview, I did pick a 4th round TKO for Stephen Thompson. I'm really kind of feeling now like it'll be a decision. And I think it'll be a pretty slow one because I think Stephen Thompson is just going to keep Woodley at a range where he's not effective, and Woodley is going to patiently wait for his opening, and not a lot will happen while Stephen Thompson just kind of wins the rounds. I think it'll be like Thompson versus McDonald, except that Woodley is not even as confident as McDonald in pressuring the way Rory eventually decided to do in that fight. So Stephen Thompson I'll stick with my original pick and say 4th or 5th round TKO, but decision is kind of what I'm feeling now.
Yeah, I mean it is tough because you know having just watched Tyron Woodley go out and murk Robbie Lawler, I'm not happy about the idea of then Tyron Woodley going out and losing. I think like that doesn't please me.
Want to see him capitalize. I picked him in that fight. I was really happy to have picked a first-round KO for Tyron Woodley correctly. And so, again, it pains me to pick against him so confidently.
And I understood that was a very real possibility that I should be prepared for, and then I cried a lot because I picked Robbie Lawler, because I was always going to pick Robbie Lawler, because I'm not a fucking Benedict Arnold, sir.
There are so many people who feel I betrayed Robbie Lawler by correctly picking against him.
I know.
How dare I entertain the thought of Brutal Bob losing a fight?
I know, but on that note, I mean, the big thing with Woodley is really, honestly, the story of his career is it's first-round knockouts or boring fights.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's either finding that instant chance, that instant shot before everybody is set up, where his speed and his power absolutely just shock the shit out of whoever he's fighting.
Yep.
Or it's a boring fight.
The only exception being the Nate Marquardt fight, which was a fun fight all the way and a pretty close one all the way. But
and
again,
when he lost.
One he lost, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, Thompson does have, like a lot of fighters who aren't necessarily the most dynamically athletic in the world. Thompson, I think, does have small moments early where he will just he will be surprised by how fast somebody comes after him.
Yeah,
like Johnny Hendricks closed him down early in that fight.
But his insurance against that is his range and his karate background. Like, he is not gonna, it's not gonna be a problem the way it was for Robbie, who kind of confusingly wanted to counterfight against Tyron Woodley, but to counterfight effectively, Robbie Lawler has to be in a pretty close distance.
Yeah, Robbie Lawler, when he wants to really counterfight, he tends to just let himself get walked into the cage, where he feels like, I think, and I've seen this with a few different fighters, where I think the cage becomes like this safety net for them, where it's like, even though I'm limiting my options and my movement and maybe even my ability to counter, it's like that that mobster mentality of, like, you always take the table near the back so that nobody can sneak up behind you.
Right. You put your back to the wall and you face the door. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there are a few counter fighters who have that mentality.
That shows the difference between us, because when you say that, you think mobsters, because you probably watched a lot of mobster movies. When I hear that, I think Dune, because they talk about it in the book Dune.
But yeah, I mean, you have to know that the only reason it can exist in something like Dune is because of the mobster movies, where it became a cliche.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just, and that's the thing with Lawler, that we've seen it, is, he's very willing to let himself get backed up so that he can roll in and have this, like, very comfortable position in the pocket, where even though he'll get hit, he's very ready to be hit and then counter, and which is poison to fighting somebody like Woodley, who hits that hard and who can press that much, who can take that kind of early advantage and just turn it into something disastrous.
Yes.
I still don't know how if you skipped straight to the second round of a Lawler-Woodley fight, how the rest of that fight would go. I have no idea, frankly.
Well, I think Lawler would have won, and that's why a lot of people were picking him in a 5-round contest. But I just thought, going into it, Robbie Lawler's going to let Woodley get those chances, and most fighters require an adjustment period. That's not any less true for Robbie Lawler. In fact, it may be more true. And if you have to adjust against Tyron Woodley, it is very often the end of you. His speed is so difficult to adjust to.
Lawler is very much the, like, supercomputer fighter, where he's just constantly watching you and taking in all this data until he figures out exactly how to solve you, and then he solves you.
And unfortunately, he blue screened and didn't have time to restart.
Absolutely. And Stephen Thompson, there's an aspect of that to his game, but a lot more. It's with a lot more care and a lot less, I'm going to gather my data by being punched. Yes. I think the distance is his insurance there. Yeah. He can more safely, like, that's what he did to Rory McDonald. He talked about how he saw Rory McDonald and somehow knew that he thought Rory McDonald was going to pressure him.
Or actually, I think it was that he wanted to come after Rory, and he saw by the way Rory was standing that Rory somehow expected that. And so he switched on a dime, and he played the first 2 or 3 rounds super safe.
Yep.
Long distance, keep him away, and figure out the best way to get after him and the best way to stop him. There are a few strikers as effective at stymieing their opponents as Stephen Thompson.
And unfortunately, some of the ugliest fights you can see in the entire history of fighting, which overstatement, but still, are fights where Tyron Woodley does not feel like he has a comfortable grasp of range.
Yep.
I mean, that Rory McDonald fight was an all-time bad fight.
I think it was terrible, but I enjoyed watching Rory McDonald pick apart a good fighter. But it was a very bad fight for Woodley.
It was a very bad fight for Woodley.
Yeah, he looked completely lost after the first round.
And so, yeah, it's hard to pick Woodley here, which I do feel for him. I think he's kind of got like he's somewhere in between like the John Jones problem and the Daniel Cormier problem. Like Daniel Cormier, other than that they're both black, which a whole different problem.
I don't think it's irrelevant, but
yeah,
we won't talk about it. We won't talk about it too much.
Daniel Cormier has the hall monitor problem, where he comes off as this very like, dadly, let's all follow the rules and let's all be good chums and all that, and then Jones has the like slightly duplicitous thing where it just seems like he's trying to game the system somehow in a way that people don't buy.
Yeah, like seems a little too professional, like it's not real.
Yeah. And Woodley is just sort of like he's floating somewhere in between those where he'll do things like he'll only answer presser questions with I'm the best middleweight or I'm the best welterweight in the world. And then people are like, come on, dude. Like,
when we talked to him, it was a lot of like plugging his teammates, making sure everybody got their due, talking about the people who trained him. A lot of the stuff you kind of expect from like the professional PR trained fighter.
Yeah. And then at other times it's, calling out GSP and Nick Diaz and trying to play the game.
He was also real though. He called Johnny Hendricks a little baby. So he said he was crying.
I have no problem with Woodley. I'm fine with him as champ. I like him, but I definitely like that whole setup he had of like, when I say who got my back, you say I got your back, and everybody shouted, he shouted who got my back, and everybody shouted Wonder Boy.
Yeah, I'm going to compare Tyron Woodley to another black fighter who has gone through this. He reminds me a lot of Rashad Evans.
Yeah, he does.
Sharp dressed, well spoken, obviously intelligent. People can't connect to that for whatever reason. And so obviously the solution is to just get Tyron Woodley to fight John Jones, and then everyone will like him again because that's how it has to happen.
Seems that way. It hasn't worked for DC yet, though.
DC fought Jones because DC then got to be the champ, and so then people reverted to somehow liking Jones again as a challenger.
Well, like everybody liked everybody was liked DC, when Jones wasn't around. Then they're like, oh yeah, DC's fine and all that, and then the moment Jones comes back, and it's just like pointing and laughing at him.
This Cormier is a loudmouth, and he's cocky. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, these are all guys that I really like. Rashad Evans, Tyron Woodley, Daniel Cormier. I love these guys. And so it does kind of baffle me that they have such a hard time getting over with the core MMA fan base.
Yep. On this note, Tyron Woodley is the underdog, plus 174 to plus 155. Thompson, the favorite, minus 193 to minus 210. The reason I do feel this is harder to pick than the Jedrzejczyk Kowalkiewicz fight is just because Tyron Woodley does have a couple of real edges. He has the punching power. He has that dynamic burst ability that are edges that Thompson does not have and cannot match. Thompson can defend them and probably will, but there are real openings there, whereas with Kowalkiewicz, just like I don't see, unless you just get lucky, unless you just land a shot that knocks Jedrzejczyk out.
Right. Because Kowalkiewicz just isn't a knockout artist, and Woodley is. And so that always makes the chances a little higher. It's, it's just, we won't, let's not waste any more time on it. It's.
All right. Let's move ahead. Final fight of the card: Eddie Alvarez, Conor McGregor. This is kind of weird because we're coming right off this Tyron Woodley Stephen Thompson fight, talking about how a guy who has a big knockout threat early is going to lose to somebody who is a smart fighter who prepares really well, and
especially once again with Mark Henry in his corner.
Yep.
The RDA fight was a bright spot in a couple difficult years for Eddie Alvarez, and I think a lot of people are now expecting that to continue.
And I am looking at this with the idea that I think as well as Eddie Alvarez can prepare, and he will. We know Eddie Alvarez watches a ton of tape. We know he gets a very particular game plan in mind for every fighter. I think the margin is too narrow to stay safe for 5 rounds against Conor McGregor. I think that Conor McGregor does a lot of what Anthony Pettis does in terms of his boxing process. I mean, I'm not saying they're the same fighter, but I see the similarities in that game. But McGregor is a much better pressure fighter than Pettis.
By a huge margin. And
is much less likely to get himself backed against the fence. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to really be threatening McGregor with very distinct threats to get him to back off. Like, you have to be in that Diaz mode where he cannot seem to hurt you or tire you. And
even then, he's almost got to be hurt or tired already for him to willingly back off.
Yeah, like, you really have to have taken something out of McGregor to force him to back up. Mm-hmm. And without that, Eddie Alvarez has always been hurtable. And he could get hurt against Conor McGregor and bounce back. We've seen him do it. But I hate putting my faith in that. I hate putting my faith in this guy can almost get KO'd and then rally against somebody who has the kind of knockout threat that Conor McGregor does. And Eddie Alvarez is he's not a great submission artist, really. He's not a bad grappler, but he's just not a great controlling he's not a great controlling force on the ground.
Against the fence, but not on the ground.
He's a great controlling force against the fence when he can pressure you, but not on the ground.
Yeah.
He's just not. He's not the best top control wrestler or control grappler in the world. And so it really depends on his ability to back McGregor up and to do so without getting hurt. And to face down a pressure fighter like McGregor and put him on his back foot like he did RDA. And I think that McGregor is a cleaner, more powerful counterpuncher than RDA. RDA is a great pressure fighter and has a great ability to pressure, but McGregor, like we saw in the fight with Ferguson that just happened, if you pressure RDA, even without necessarily hurting him a ton, even when he's not hurt a ton, it just Ferguson was able to just overwhelm him. It was like presenting too many options and too much offense at once, to the point that RDA was just like, I can throw a shot and then I got to reset. I got to think about this. I got to find and see what's coming at me. His counter fighting isn't as fluid as McGregor's, which it just seems like you come after him and the timing is right there for him. Yeah. He's got the kind of speed and power that he knows how to unchamber it at just the right moments to drive you away. And I don't see Alvarez having the answer for that. So I got to take McGregor here.
Yeah, and the really big difference for me between Dos Anjos and McGregor as pressure fighters is that Dos Anjos, in that fight, he was pressuring very effectively.
Yeah.
He was largely winning the fight. He landed the better shots up to that point. Alvarez, to his credit, never looked lost. He always looked like he knew what he wanted to do. He looked very calm and composed, and he found the opening he wanted. But, you know, the thing with RDA is that he keeps a very close distance and throws a lot of volume when he pressures. He's standing in the middle distance. He's throwing out his hands and kicks, not quite constantly, but often, and trying to make that pressure a constant and very real threat. And McGregor has arms 5 inches longer than Eddie Alvarez's. He has a long distance pressuring style where he can afford, even against Nate Diaz, who was longer reach than Conor himself, he pressured him from a pretty long distance. He wanted to pressure and be an aggressive counter fighter where he kind of made Nate lead and then hit back. And that's tough. Eddie Alvarez here is in a tough position because I think he does have the stamina advantage. People have now tried to underwrite that a bit and say that, you know, maybe Eddie Alvarez is not that good with his cardio. He's certainly no Nate Diaz, but I think he has proven himself in some tough, gritty fights, some grueling, long fights that he can go for 5 rounds. At the very least, if he is not impossible to tire, his long experience has made him comfortable fighting tired.
Yeah, he fights exceptionally well tired.
Yes, he maintains pretty damn well when he's tired. And granted, of course, Conor finally showed the ability to do that in the last fight with Nate Diaz, which I really do think was a strong performance. He had some really bad moments. People love retconning shit. People love going back to fights and saying, oh, this didn't actually, oh, it wasn't as... People now are saying that Nate Diaz actually didn't land any clean shots on Conor McGregor at the end of the 3rd round. I think Conor was hurt. I actually think that round was quite close, but there's no way not to give Nate Diaz a really strong edge in the scoring there because he landed a lot of clean shots there. McGregor was tired, but McGregor came back from that and fought off the back foot, pot-shotting, sticking and moving, using his jab more than ever before. He learned what it's like to be exhausted and still be performing. And that's a big thing because going forward, it does seem, unless lightweight is somehow the magical cure for his stamina issues, that McGregor is going to continually be haunted by those stamina issues. I think he's just too much of a burst fighter. Everything is so powerful. And two, I think the problem with Nate is that Pat Wyman raised this point to me on Heavy Hands, and I think it does stand to reason that maybe McGregor won't gas as much against other guys because his aggressive counterpunching is like a thing he can't resist. You give him his openings, he's going to jump on every single opening. And so because Nate Diaz is constantly flicking out his jab, trying to counterpunch, trying to maintain a pace, McGregor was almost enslaved to that pace. He had to match pace with his counters. And
that's like a fundamental part of the Diaz game, is getting you drawn into a fight, a pace that you cannot possibly keep and you can't stop. You cannot. Yeah.
And I think McGregor may be like uniquely vulnerable to that because he's so willing. If you give him an opening, he is going to attack it. So it's tough because I don't think Eddie Alvarez is going to be able to do that much volume that like Nate Diaz did. He's very difficult to finish, but I don't think he's going to be as durable outright as Nate and be able to take so many shots. He's at least going to get hurt and give a great finisher and McGregor a chance to swarm him. And as what I said before, when he's in a tough spot, it's because by far what Eddie Alvarez is best at is counterpunching. And counterpunching against McGregor means allowing yourself to kind of be pressured. Eddie Alvarez is at his most vulnerable when he's forced to lead. We saw that in the Melendez fight, the Pettis fight. We've seen it a lot. The Chandler fights. When he comes after you and tries to cover that distance, he's very right hand happy, and he throws combinations right from the get-go, and his defense kind of goes away when he's attacking. So he's vulnerable there. He's best when he's counterpunching. He did that against RDA. He kind of walked RDA into traps. He defended, which he can do quite well when he's not exchanging punches, and he looked for his openings. But doing that against Conor McGregor gives a longer, more consistent pressure fighter a really a good chance of hitting you when you're trying to wait for him to go. But then, of course, pressuring McGregor might make a lot of sense because McGregor, as a pressure fighter, I think is most vulnerable to consistent pressure. But that means walking into his counters. And he's really good at creating just enough space to crack you when you come forward. We've seen that time and time again. I do have faith that Eddie Alvarez will come into this, like you said, well prepared. Not only is he a guy who I think comes into fights with game plans habitually, but again, Mark Henry, very, very studious coach, watches a lot of footage, trains a lot of specific tactics for what his opponent brings to the table. They have talked several times about what they call McGregor's rock back counter, his rock back left, which either means that hop step left hand that he uses so much, or the pull counter he was using so much against Nate Diaz, like the Mayweather type thing where he'll hang his chin out and then pull and come right back without moving his feet. But I imagine they're prepared for both of those. But how well prepared can you be when your natural tendencies maybe kind of put you in the path of Conor McGregor? If I'm Eddie Alvarez, I'm thinking 2-stage game plan. I'm thinking counterpunch, work the jab, move a lot, and counterpunch as best you can in the early going. Hope that Conor McGregor tires, and then pressure the hell out of him late in the fight. That's what I'm doing if I'm Eddie Alvarez. I'd swarm him only after he slows down visibly. But he's got to survive 2 rounds, and he is hittable, more hurtable than Nate, just as tough and good at recovering, but more easily hurt in the first place. And that's a tough spot to be in with McGregor. So I'm picking McGregor. I think it'll be an early knockout. I think it'll be an early knockout in the first round, in fact. But no matter what, I think it's going to be a fun, competitive fight. And seeing how Alvarez responds will make it like the Nate Diaz fights. It'll make it incredibly exciting if Eddie Alvarez gets to the point where he can start finding openings, because he's not Nate Diaz in terms of how fast he can fight for so long. And even Nate Diaz slowed down a lot in the rematch because the pace was too much for him, and McGregor was targeting his body and his legs a lot. But Eddie Alvarez is also a more dangerous striker than Nate Diaz. And when he pours it on, he can get you out of there in an instant. And we've seen how much more vulnerable Conor McGregor looks when he is tired. That's the only times we've really seen him hurt are in his UFC career with the Nate Diaz fights. And both times he got tired, and then without his conditioning, it was harder for him to recover from the clean shots that were landing. So Eddie Alvarez has a real window of opportunity here. And I didn't even mention the wrestling game, which I don't think will be – he's not Chad Mendes, but no. Eddie Alvarez can counter with takedowns when McGregor pressures, and that will be a big advantage for him. If he can get McGregor off his feet, even just to wear him out and make him work and save himself a little time being pressed against the fence, that'll be big for him too. So the opportunities are there. But it will take basically, it's one of those fights where it kind of feels like it'll take a pretty perfect performance from Eddie Alvarez to win. And he's capable, but it's a tall order. So I'm picking McGregor by first round KO.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too. I mean, maybe not first, maybe second, but it just, you have to be betting on Alvarez to come in with exactly the right plan and follow it perfectly. And it feels like McGregor has a lot more open opportunity to not do that. But to that point too, I think the last Nate Diaz fight was the first time that McGregor ever considered coming in with a opponent-specific plan. And
it was baffling to hear he and Kavanaugh in the camp talk about like how revolutionary the idea of preparing. I don't fully buy it. Like, I think they must have prepared specific tactics in the first.
I don't. I mean, like, you got to think about how many fighters have you talked to and heard from that are like, I don't game plan. I don't want to know what my opponent is doing. The only person I don't
trust it from Kavanaugh. I think Kavanaugh is really big on the flow, the be Bruce Lee type approach.
Yeah.
But I do think Owen Roddy would have prepared McGregor for specific openings on the pads. It looked like the uppercut he went for in that Nate Diaz fight, while it worked okay against Nate, it looked like that was really designed for Rafael dos Anjos.
You hope that some coach, even if he's not telling anyone that he's doing this, is like watching the tape and,
Somebody's
doing something. But I think in general for the camp, it was
Yeah, what they definitely weren't doing is like bringing in sparring partners to replicate your opponents. And they thought that was like, they seem to think that was like some crazy new shit when most of the top camps are already doing that. So that is a little, but I hope he carries that forward. You know,
I hope so too. I hope that was a valuable lesson. Cause like I say, I mean, Alvarez, you know, he's the kind of guy that you hear about not just how much tape he watches about on his opponents, but how much tape he watches on himself. Like this is a dude that is constantly watching fight footage.
Yeah.
And constantly trying to plan around whoever he's fighting. And like I say, you just know he's going to come in prepared because of that.
It does seem to suggest that if it comes down to game plan, that it'll be in Alvarez's advantage, but that McGregor can probably win just doing regular McGregor things. He has a much better chance of just winning early doing that.
Yeah, he has a lot more leeway in his game plan.
Yes, absolutely.
So, on that note, the odds, Conor McGregor is the favorite, -145 to -175. Eddie Alvarez, the underdog, +148 down to +115. Any final notes on fights that you feel like should be bet on? I mean, I don't know that I would bet. I mean, maybe on Conor McGregor at -145. Like, I feel like the opportunity, like the opportunities for him to win will be right there in this fight.
I bet on it to last less than 1.5 rounds. That's the bet I put on this fight. My book doesn't offer McGregor by KO, but the odds for that are
TKO is -105 to +100.
It says +103 on mine, but maybe mine's not updated. So the lines are changing. Which
lines are going to change a lot on this. In fact, I should update and check again.
That happens rapidly with McGregor fights, especially these days.
Yeah,
+103 right now to +100. Oh, down to -110.
You can get McGregor inside the distance, not even just by KO at or that's still minus in the minuses. But +103.
If you're going to prop the finish, it's definitely going to be a knockout.
Yeah.
I think -1.5 rounds is not terrible at +150-ish range right now. But I wouldn't, I don't know. I think those are the best ways to go here because if McGregor wins, he's probably going to get Alvarez out of there. The other bets that I like, small underdog bet on Michael Johnson, maybe a small underdog bet on Jim Miller. And then I do think that Frankie Edgar by decision at very slight favorite odds is a really strong bet.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we should close the show before we get way too ridiculously far into the over length spectrum.
We tried our best, guys. We tried.
We did. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Conor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. If you're watching this video on YouTube, and you damn well better be because that's the only place we are showing it, give it a thumbs up. That is this thing down below. That helps us a ton. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM. That's our YouTube channel. That's where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, interviews, videos, analysis, all that good stuff. Conor has something he wants to say before I close out. So what is it?
Apparently, crazy shit is currently happening at the McGregor-Alvarez press conference. So the heat is building. I'm getting more excited. Apparently, McGregor almost threw a chair at Eddie Alvarez. So
lessons not learned from his Nevada State Athletic Commission thing.
Why learn a lesson? It made him more money than he lost, I think. So.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I mean, crazy shit will ensue. Everybody enjoy the fights. We'll be back next week to talk about Fight Night Musashi versus Hall 2 in Belfast, which obviously, as fun as that is going to be way less exciting than this. But thanks, everyone, and we will see you next time.